40 of the internet's creepiest conspiracy theories. Now in this video, we will talk about 10 cold case / crime theories, 10 paranormal / haunting theories, 10 cryptid / creatures theories, and then we will finish it off with 10 internet theories. Now I will put time codes on the screen somewhere, either here or here, I don't know. But if there is one category that you are more interested in than, other ones, you can just skip forward and only, focus on the theories that you want to hear. Well, we have a ton of theories to cover, so let's get straight into the cold case / crime theories. The Axeman of New Orleans. In the early 1900s, New Orleans was shaken by a series of brutal axe murders. Now, between 1918 and 1919, someone who would later come to be referred to as the Axeman attacked families at night by breaking into their homes and attacking them with an axe as they slept. Now, the majority of the victims were either immigrants from Italy, and that caused many to assume that the murders had to do something with organized crime. Now, the oddity was that absolutely nothing was ever taken from the homes, and in most cases, the murderer would employ the victim's own axe from their home. Now, one of the biggest theories is that the Axeman was linked to the mafia. Now, because most victims were immigrants from Italy, some think that the Axeman was sent as a warning or a punishment to families that didn't take extortion money. Another theory is that the Axeman was really a more depraved serial killer who simply harassed these families because they were easiest to find and they were just the most convenient. Now, others also point to a letter which was purposed to be written by the Axeman himself, in which it stated that he would spare anyone who had jazz playing on one particular evening. Now, that fanned into another theory, and that's that the Axeman was obsessive about jazz and that the murders were really a twisted way to make sure that cities would move further into the genre. The Phantom Killer of Texarkana. Now, back in 1946, the town of Texarkana was thrown into panic after a string of brutal attacks. Now, a man started targeting young couples parked on lovers' lanes, and the press quickly gave him the name the Phantom Killer. Now, over a 10-week period, he attacked 8 people and killed 5. Now, what terrified people most was that he always struck at night, he wore a white mask over his face, and he seemed to vanish into the dark without leaving much evidence behind. Now, the entire community was living in fear, and the case became known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Now, one of the main theories is that the Phantom was actually Ul Swiney, a petty criminal in the area. Now, police tied him to a stolen car that matched witness descriptions, and his wife gave statements that lined up with details from the murders. But because she couldn't legally testify against her husband, they didn't have enough to convict him, so the case, stalled. Now, another theory is that the Phantom was never caught because he was either a police officer or had law enforcement training. Now, the idea comes from how easily he avoided roadblocks and searches. It was almost like he knew what steps police would take before they even took them. Some also believe that the Phantom was a soldier recently returned from World War II, explaining his skill with weapons, his stalking methods, and why the murders suddenly stopped. He could have been deployed again, or he even could have been relocated. Now, what keeps this case alive today is that it was, never solved, just like all of these. No one was officially charged, and with every theory, there's just enough evidence to make it possible, but there's never enough evidence to close the case. And that's why there are so many theories about the Phantom. The Boy in the Chimney. In 2008, the body of a young man named Joshua Maddox was found inside the chimney of a cabin in Woodland Park, Colorado. He had been missing since 2008, and it wasn't until 2015 that his remains were discovered. Now, the position of the body was strange. He was naked, with his clothes folded neatly inside the cabin, and he had been lodged headfirst in the chimney. Now, because of how unusual it looked, the case quickly sparked conspiracy theories. Now, one of the main ideas is that Joshua got stuck while trying to enter the cabin. Now, people argue that he could have been seeking shelter or exploring, and when he tried to climb down the chimney, he just couldn't get out. But that explanation doesn't make much sense to others because the chimney had a heavy metal grate at the top that, should have blocked him. Another theory is that Joshua was murdered. Now, the folded clothes inside the cabin raised suspicion and, some point to the possibility that someone forced him into the chimney and staged the scene to make it look accidental. The fact that he was naked in a chimney but had folded clothes, in the cabin, Like, it doesn't seem like he was trying to get back inside the cabin. It seems like he was already in the cabin before getting stuck in the chimney. Now, there's also people who think that Joshua was the victim of foul play tied to local drug activity or maybe even a personal conflict. Now, because again, there was, never enough evidence to prove how he ended up there, so his death remains unsolved. And it's the unanswered questions about the grate, the folded clothes, and, his just odd position in the chimney. And that's why this case has so many different theories. The Dardeen family murders. Now, in 1987, the Dardeen family was murdered in a way that shocked even seasoned investigators. Russell Dardeen, his wife Elaine, their 3-year-old son Peter, and their newborn daughter, who Elaine gave birth to during the attack, were all killed inside their small home in Ina, Illinois. Now, what stood out was the brutality, okay? Elaine and the children were beaten to death with a baseball bat that Russell had kept in the house for protection, and Russell's body was later found outside, shot and mutilated. Now, one of the theories is that Russell himself was involved at first, maybe snapping under stress, but that doesn't really line up with all the evidence. He had been murdered separately, and the crew was far too violent to suggest something like a family dispute. Now, another theory points to a random drifter or serial killer passing through southern Illinois at the time. Now, the area was close to highways, and investigators knew multiple killers were active in the Midwest during the 80s. Now, the strongest theory links the crime to serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells. Now, he later confessed to murdering the Dardeens, saying that he had been traveling and targeted them at random, but because his story changed over time and he was, known to exaggerate things, many, doubt his confession. The lack of solid evidence and the strange details of the crime scene have kept the case unsolved, and that's why it continues, to fuel conspiracy theories about who really killed the Dardeen family and, more importantly, why. Was it just a random attack? Was it just, a serial killer that was traveling and just happened to be in that part of Illinois and just picked the family at random? Or was there something else that we just don't know about and probably will never know about? The Icebox Murders. In 1965, police in Houston, Texas made a discovery that would shock the city. Fred and Edwina Rogers, an elderly couple, were found murdered and stuffed into their own refrigerator. Their bodies had been dismembered and parts of them were placed in the icebox while their organs were flushed down the sewer. The house showed no signs of forced entry, which made investigators look at someone inside the home. And that's when the suspicion immediately turned on their son, Charles Rogers. Now, Charles was a reclusive man in his 40s who still lived with his parents. Now, neighbors rarely saw him, and he was described as highly intelligent with a background in the Navy and geology. Now, because there was no signs of robbery and no evidence pointing to an outsider, the main theory is that Charles killed his parents after years of tension at home. Some reports say that Fred and Edwina were controlling and may have been abusive, giving Charles a possible motive. And after the murders, Charles vanished without a trace, which only fueled to the idea that he was guilty. Now, another theory is that Charles never acted alone or that he was killed himself shortly after fleeing. But, with no body, no confession, and no solid leads, the case remains one of Houston's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. The Atlas Vampire Police. In 1932, a crime shook Stockholm that has never been solved. A 32-year-old woman named Lily Linderstrom was found dead in her apartment near Atlas, a neighborhood in the city. Now, she had been beaten to death, but what made the case so disturbing was that her body was drained of all blood. A soup ladle was found near her, and investigators believed that it had been used to drink the blood. Now, the press quickly gave the killer the name the Atlas Vampire, obviously because it was thought that he drank blood. Now, the strange details of the murder are what led to conspiracy theories. So one theory is that the killer was actually someone connected to the police. I mean, people point out that the investigation seemed, pretty sloppy, with evidence being mishandled and very little follow-up. And the fact that the murder happened in a busy area but no suspect was ever caught adds to the suspicion. Now, another theory is that the case was intentionally covered up because the killer was someone powerful or someone protected. The vampire-like elements of the crime made it sensational, but the lack of progress and the silence that followed left many wondering if authorities knew more than they admitted to. Now, of course, the murder of Lily Lindstrom remains unsolved, and the idea that the police themselves were somehow involved keeps the conspiracy alive to this day. Zodiac's Unsolved Murders theory. Now, in the late 1960s and the early 70s, California was stalked by a killer who called himself the Zodiac. Now, he attacked couples in secluded areas, he taunted police with letters, and he sent cryptic ciphers to newspapers. The confirmed attacks left at least 5 people dead, but in his letters, he claimed the real number was much higher. And that's where the conspiracy theories start. Now, one of the strongest theories is that the Zodiac killer was responsible for many more murders across California and maybe even some other states. Now, there were unsolved cases at the time that looked similar, like young couples attacked in cars or lone women disappearing on highways. Now, some of these cases lined up with the Zodiac's timeline and methods, which made people think that he was moving around and striking outside the Bay Area. Now, another part of this theory comes from the Zodiac's own words. In his letters, he bragged about dozens of victims, and while it could have been lies to boost his image, investigators really never ruled it out. Now, the problem is that the evidence never fully connected those unsolved murders to him, but the brutality, the matching patterns, and the Zodiac's habit of taunting police leave open the possibility that his real body count was far larger than anyone ever realized. And I'll just say it right now, there's no way that he only killed 5 people. I'll just say that. Say what you want to say. Zodiac's 340 Cipher. In 1969, the Zodiac killer sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle that included a 340 character cipher. It became known as the 340 Cipher, and for decades it stood as one of the biggest mysteries in true crime. Now, the Zodiac had already sent another cipher earlier that year, which was solved quickly and hinted at his desire to collect victims as slaves for the afterlife. But this new code was far more complex, and no one could crack it for over 50 years. Now, the big conspiracy around it is that the 340 cipher was never just a message, but a hidden clue to the Zodiac's identity. Now, people have argued that the code contained his real name, or at least maybe part of it, and that the authorities kept the truth hidden to protect the investigation. Now, others point to the possibility that the cipher linked the Zodiac to military or intelligence backgrounds, since the pattern in code looked like it was designed by someone trained in cryptography. Now, in 2020, a team of codebreakers finally cracked the cipher using advanced computer software. Now, the solution didn't reveal a name, but it did match the Zodiac's style, mocking the police and bragging about evading capture. Because it avoided giving away his identity, the theories that he planted a bigger secret inside the code still live on. Oscar Zeta Acosta disappearance. Now, Oscar Acosta was a lawyer, an activist, and a writer who became widely known in the 1960s and the 1970s for his work with the Chicano movement. Now, he was also the real-life inspiration for Dr. Gonzo in Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. In 1974, Acosta traveled to Mexico and then disappeared without a trace. There was no body found, and the case remains open, which has fueled years of speculation about what really happened to him. Now, one theory is that Acosta was murdered because of his political activism. Now, he had been deeply involved in fighting police corruption and defending members of the Chicano community, and some argue that powerful people wanted him silenced. Now, another theory is tied to drugs. Now, Acosta was known to use them heavily, and some say he may have gotten caught up in a deal that went wrong in Mexico. Now, there's also the idea that he faked his own disappearance. I mean, he was facing personal struggles, including addiction and strained relationships, and some believe that he wanted to escape everything and start over under a new identity. Because no evidence ever surfaced to prove any of these possibilities, his disappearance has stayed one of the most mysterious and debated cases in counterculture history. The poisoned Tylenol murders. In 1982, Chicago was hit with a series of deaths that terrified the entire country. 7 people died after taking extra-strength Tylenol capsules that had been laced with cyanide. Now, the deaths seemed random, and police discovered that someone had taken bottles off of store shelves, poisoned them, and then put them back for unsuspecting customers to buy. Now, the case led to nationwide panic, and it forced drug companies to completely redesign packaging with tamper-proof seals. Now, the mystery is that no one was ever convicted for the murders. Now, one theory is that it was a random act by an individual, possibly someone who enjoyed creating chaos. A man named James Lewis became a prime suspect after he sent a letter demanding money from Johnson & Johnson to quote-unquote stop the killings, but there was never enough evidence to prove that he actually poisoned the bottles. Now, another theory is that it wasn't a lone killer at all, but someone with ties to the pharmaceutical industry, or even with Johnson & Johnson itself. Now, people point out that the company benefited from the new tamper-proof laws, and some suggest that the killings may have been an inside job to push those changes. All right, now let's move on to the paranormal theories. Borley Rectory. Borley Rectory in Essex, England was once called one of the most haunted houses in Britain. Now, it was built in 1862, and it quickly gained a reputation for strange activity. People reported footsteps, whispers, ghostly figures, and even writings that appeared on the wall. Now, the most famous story was of a phantom nun who was seen wandering the grounds. By the 1920s and the 1930s, the house became the center of investigations by paranormal researcher Harry Price, which only added to, the legend. Now, the conspiracy comes in with questions about whether the hauntings were real or staged. Now, one theory is that Harry Price exaggerated or even fabricated evidence to boost his own reputation, and people point to the fact that many of his findings couldn't be verified, and some of his assistants later said that he planted objects to create the illusion of paranormal activity. Now, another theory is that these strange events were the result of local people and even residents of the rectory themselves playing into the ghost stories. Now, because the rectory eventually burned down in 1939, some claim that the destruction was intentional, either to hide evidence of hoaxes or because the activity had, grown too intense. Now, with no way to prove what really happened, Borley Rectory remains wrapped in mystery, with debates over whether it was a truly haunted site or it was just one of the biggest staged ghost stories in history. The Screaming Tunnel in Ontario. Now, in Niagara Falls, there's an old stone tunnel known as the Screaming Tunnel. It was built in the early 1900s as a drainage tunnel, but it gained its dark reputation from the legends that grew around it. Locals say that if you stand inside at night and light a match, you'll hear a blood-curdling scream, and the flame will suddenly blow out. Now, the story behind it is where the conspiracy theories start. One theory is that a young girl once lived in a farmhouse near the tunnel. Now, after a fire broke out, she ran into the tunnel with her clothes burning and she died inside. People argue that that explains why screams are still heard and why flames won't last in the tunnel. Another version says the girl was murdered. Now, in this story, her father, in a fit of rage, set her on fire in the tunnel, and because the police at the time didn't have strong evidence, it's said that the case was quietly ignored. Now, there's also a theory that the land was connected to disputes over property rights and that the fire was intentionally set to scare families away. But the mix of unexplained screams, sudden extinguished flames, and the conflicting backstories have kept the Screaming Tunnel alive as one of Canada's creepiest unsolved mysteries. And quick little story time real quick. Where I grew up as a child, there were a bunch of ballparks by my house. And if you went past the ballparks a little bit, there was a tunnel that ran for, probably 5 or 6 miles. And we used to go walk up and down those tunnels. Like, we wouldn't go super far, but we would, go in them and shine a flashlight and stuff like that. And I'll never forget, there was one kid that I knew who swore that he went inside that tunnel, and it was him and like 2 other people, and he has his flashlight out and he's going through the tunnel, and then all of a sudden he sees in the way back of the tunnel, like, of course it's pitch black, he sees another flashlight go on and then go off. So hey, that could have been someone else in the tunnel messing with him, or that could have been a haunted tunnel as well. Pretty creepy. The Whaley House. The Whaley House in San Diego is often called one of the most haunted houses in America. Now, it was built in 1857 by Thomas Whaley on land that had once been used as a site for public executions. Now, right away, people said that that cursed the property. The family that lived there also faced tragedy after tragedy, from the death of their young son to financial ruin and suicides in later years. And because of all of that history, the house became the center of ghost stories and conspiracy theories. One of the main theories is that the land itself carries dark energy from the executions that happened there before the house was built. Visitors and staff have reported seeing apparitions of men believed to be those who were hung on the property, which is why people connect the hauntings back to that. Another theory is that the tragedies within the Whaley family trapped their spirits inside the home. People have claimed to hear the footsteps of Thomas Whaley himself and see the figure of his wife Anna. There are also reports of children's laughter and shadows moving across rooms when no one is there. The constant paranormal claims and the family's tragic history are what keep the Whaley House at the center of conspiracy and debate, with some saying that there's literal proof that the house is cursed. The Ancient Ram Inn. The Ancient Ram Inn in Gloucestershire, England. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's just how I'm gonna pronounce it. But it's often described as one of the most haunted buildings in the world. Now, it was built in the 12th century and it has a long and dark history. The land it sits on was once a pagan burial ground, and some say that human sacrifices took place there. Now, over the centuries, the building served as a house, as an inn, and even housing for priests, but through it all, countless stories of paranormal activity surrounded it. Now, the conspiracy comes from why this place has such a terrifying reputation. Now, one theory is that the inn was cursed because of the pagan rituals tied to the land. People who stay there have reported being attacked, being pushed, or even dragged out of bed. And that right there, fuels the idea that something ancient and violent was never put to rest in that building. Now, another theory is that the house itself became a site for witchcraft. Bones of children and ritual objects were found under the floorboards during renovations, which makes people think that dark practices were carried out in secret. There are also claims that tunnels beneath the inn were used for trafficking or hidden ceremonies, and that energy from those events still lingers today. The combination of the pagan history, the alleged sacrifices, and the disturbing discoveries inside the inn keep the Ancient Ram Inn at the center of conspiracy theories about whether it's just simply haunted or it's connected to something much, much, much darker. The Fox Sisters Confession. In the mid-1800s, the Fox Sisters from New York became famous for starting the spiritualist movement. Now, as teenagers, they claimed that they would communicate with the dead through strange rapping sounds that answered their questions. Now, crowds gathered to watch their seances, and soon spiritualism spread across the United States and Europe. People believed that these sisters were proof that contact with the afterlife was real. But in 1888, one of these sisters, Margaret Fox, stood on stage and confessed that it was all a hoax. She showed how they created the rapping sounds by cracking their joints in their toes, which could echo loudly in a quiet room. Now, newspapers ran with the story, and critics declared that spiritualism was built on lies. However, not long after that, Margaret took back her confession, saying that she had been pressured into admitting it. Now, that retraction is where the conspiracy theories begin. Now, one theory is that the confession was forced by religious groups who wanted to destroy spiritualism, which had grown too influential. Now, another theory is that these sisters were manipulated by rivals within the movement itself, people who wanted control of the growing popularity. The contradiction between the confession and the retraction left enough doubt that many argued that the Fox sisters' abilities were never fully explained. That's why the case still fuels debate over whether they exposed themselves or they were silenced for uncovering something real and something, pretty crazy. Like talking to the dead? Shit. The Demon House of Gary, Indiana. In 2011, a small rental house in Gary, Indiana became the center of one of the strangest modern haunting cases. LaToya Amons and her 3 children reported terrifying events inside the home. They said that they saw shadowy figures, they heard footsteps, and they saw objects move on their own. Now, the children were said to have been possessed, showing unusual strength, speaking in strange voices, and even levitating. Now, what made this case so different is that not only neighbors, but also police officers, social workers, and medical staff claimed that they witnessed things that they just couldn't explain. Now, the conspiracy theories around the Demon House focus on why these events happened and why the house was eventually demolished. Now, one theory is that the property sat on cursed or haunted ground. Some point to the area's history of violence and poverty as a reason that the location carried negative energy. Another theory is that the Catholic Church and local officials downplayed or covered up the true extent of what happened to avoid public panic. Now, there's also suspicion that the house was torn down intentionally to hide evidence, since paranormal investigators who visited claimed to capture disturbing recordings and photographs inside of the house. Now, because so many credible witnesses supported the story, the Demon House has remained one of the most controversial and debated hauntings in recent history. The Devil's Tamping Ground in North Carolina. In the woods of North Carolina, there's a mysterious circle of barren ground known as the Devil's Tamping Ground. Now, it's about 40 feet wide, and for over a century, people have said nothing will grow inside of it. Even when the land around it is full of grass and plants, the circle stays empty. Local stories claim that if you leave objects in the circle overnight, that they will be thrown outside of it by the morning. And that strange detail is what gave the site its name. Now, the main conspiracy is about, what actually causes the circle. Now, one theory is that it's paranormal, with the legend saying that the devil himself uses the ground to pace in circles while he plans evil. Now, this is why nothing can grow there, because the soil has been cursed by his presence. Another theory is tied to Native American history. Some people say that the area was once used for battles or sacred rituals, and the energy from those events left the ground permanently marked. There are also theories that the land could have been contaminated by chemicals, or that it sits on a unique magnet field, which, might explain why people claim to feel uneasy when they stand there. But the fact that the circle has never fully been explained keeps the Devil's Stamping Ground one of North Carolina's most unsettling mysteries. Loftus Hall in Ireland. Oh, Ireland, innit? That's Britain, I guess. Loftus Hall in County Wexford, Ireland is often called the most haunted house in the country. Now, the mansion dates back to the 14th century and has been tied to ghost stories for centuries. Now, the most famous story centers around the 18th century, when a violent storm forced a stranger to seek shelter at the hall. The family inside welcomed him, and during a card game one night, one of the players dropped a card and leaned down to pick it up. And that's when she saw the stranger's feet were not human, but shaped like hooves. Now, once discovered, he vanished in a burst of fire and smoke, leaving the family shaken. Now, the conspiracy surrounding Loftus Hall is whether the event was simply a legend or proof of something darker. Now, one theory is that the visitor was actually the devil and that his appearance cursed the house forever. Now, this is tied to the strange activity reported in the hall, like unexplained cold spots, apparitions, and objects moving on their own. Another theory is that the story was created to cover up scandals within the Loftus family, like hidden affairs or deaths that couldn't be explained. Now, because the hall continued to be linked with tragedy and paranormal reports for generations, it remains one of Ireland's most, mysterious and feared locations. The Smurl Haunting. In the 1970s and the 80s, the Smurl family from West Pittston, Pennsylvania, claimed that their home was plagued by violent paranormal activity. They reported furniture moving on its own, foul smells filling rooms, and disturbing noises echoing throughout the house. Now, over time, the activity escalated into physical attacks. Family members said that they were scratched, shoved, and even sexually assaulted by an unseen force. The story gained national attention and eventually involved Ed and Lorraine Warren, the, well-known paranormal investigators, The Conjuring, them two, the very controversial Ed and Lorraine. But that's a story for a whole different video. Now, the conspiracy is about what really happened at the Smurl home. One theory is that the family was genuinely tormented by a demonic presence. The Warrens supported this, saying that they performed multiple exorcisms and even claimed to have seen dark figures inside the house. Now, another theory is that the Smurls fabricated or exaggerated the events for attention or financial gain, especially since their case was turned into a book and a made-for-TV movie. Now, skeptics argue that the lack of physical evidence, along with inconsistencies in the family's accounts, suggest that it was all just a hoax. Now, there's also a theory that the family suffered from stress or mental health struggles that manifested in the belief that the house was haunted. Now, because nothing was ever proven, the Smurl Haunting sits in that gray area between terrifying true haunting and carefully built up story. Which one is it? I don't know. But Ed and Lorraine Warren were involved, so gotta think about that too. I don't know. Stull Cemetery. Stull Cemetery in Kansas has been at the center of dark legends for decades. Now, it's a small rural graveyard, but it's often called one of the 7 gateways to hell. Now, the stories began in 1970s when rumors spread that the devil himself appeared there twice a year, once on Halloween and once on the spring equinox. People said he used the cemetery as a portal to the underworld, and that rituals or sacrifices had taken place on the grounds long before the legend started. Now, one theory is that the land itself was cursed. Now, some people point to old church ruins near the cemetery, saying that the building was used for occult practices that left behind a permanent mark. Another theory is that these stories were fueled by secret societies or cults that met there and the rumors were a way to keep people away from what was actually happening. There are also claims of police and locals covering up activity, since visitors have reported being chased off of the property or harassed for trying to investigate. And because of the secrecy, the ruined church, and decades of unexplained stories, Stull Cemetery remains one of the most talked about so-called gateways to hell in America. Alright, now let's move on to the cryptid theories. And super quick, for those of you that don't really know what a cryptid is, or don't know like the actual definition, a cryptid is a creature or being that is claimed to exist but has not been scientifically proven to exist, deriving from folklore and urban legends rather than established scientific fact. And for example, that's things like the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Yetis, and these next 10 that we're about to go over. Jersey Devil sightings. The Jersey Devil is one of the oldest and most famous legends in American folklore. Now, the story goes that back in the 1700s, when a woman known as Mother Leeds supposedly gave birth to her 13th child in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. According to the legend, the child was born deformed, it sprouted wings, and then it just flew into the woods, where it has been spotted ever since. Now, over the years, thousands of people have claimed to see a strange creature with hooves, wings, and a terrifying scream. Now, the conspiracy around the Jersey Devil is about what people are actually seeing. Now, one theory is that it's a real undiscovered animal that lives deep in the Pine Barrens. I mean, the area is huge and remote, so it would be possible for something to stay hidden. Now, another theory is that the legend was invented as propaganda. Early settlers and rival communities may have spread the story to keep people away from the Pine Barrens, which was seen as dangerous and uninhabitable. Now, there's also the idea that these sightings were linked to political enemies of the Leeds family, turning them into the subject of a local curse. Now, because the sightings never stopped and because the Pine Barrens remain mysterious, the Jersey Devil continues to be one of America's most unsettling cryptid conspiracies. Dover Demon of Massachusetts. In 1977, the town of Dover, Massachusetts became the focus of a strange mystery. Now, over a span of just 2 days, several teenagers reported seeing a bizarre creature that didn't look like anything they had ever seen before. They described it as having a large, bulb-shaped head, glowing orange eyes, long, thin limbs, and pale, rough skin. The creature was said to crawl on all fours, and it was almost human-like, but at the same time, not really. Now, because of how unsettling it looked, it was quickly given the name the Dover Demon. Now, one theory about the Dover Demon is that it was some kind of alien. Now, the timing of the sightings, along with its unusual body shape and its glowing eyes, made people think that it was extraterrestrial, maybe stranded or just briefly passing through Earth. Now, another theory is that it was a mutilated animal. Some argue that it could have been a young moose or another woodland creature that appeared strange in the dark, though this doesn't really fully match the details given by multiple witnesses. Now, there's also the idea that the government covered up the real truth, since Massachusetts has military bases nearby, and some think the creature may have been an escaped experiment. Now, because the sightings never happened again, and because so many people described the same thing, the Dover Demon remains one of New England's creepiest unexplained cases. The Beast of Bray Road. In the late 1980s and the early 1990s, residents of Elkhorn, Wisconsin began reporting sightings of a terrifying creature along a rural stretch known as Bray Road. Now, witnesses described it as a large, wolf-like beast that walked on 2 legs, stood over 6 feet tall, and had glowing eyes. Some even said it chased their cars or stalked them from the fields. Now, because the stories kept piling up, the creature became known as the Beast of Bray Road, and it's often compared to a modern-day werewolf. Now, one theory is that it's an undiscovered animal, something like a massive wolf or a hybrid species that learned to move on 2 legs. The area around Bray Road is wooded and rural, which could explain how something strange might go unnoticed. Another theory is that it is supernatural, with people suggesting it's a shapeshifter or demonic figure tied to Native American legends about skinwalkers, which we will actually talk about in a few minutes here. There's also the idea that the beast is connected to government experiments, since the creature's size and behavior don't match any known animal in Wisconsin. The only animals they got up there are beer bottles. The Lizard Man of Scape or Swamp. In the summer of 1988, the quiet town of Bishopville, South Carolina was shaken by reports of a strange creature lurking near Scape or swamp. A teenager claimed he saw a tall, green, scaly figure with glowing red eyes and 3 clawed fingers. Now, not long after that, cars parked near the swamp were found ripped up with deep scratch marks and bite-like damage. Now, the press gave the creature a name that stuck, and that was the Lizard Man of Scape or Swamp. Now, one theory is that the Lizard Man is a cryptid, some undiscovered reptilian species that lives in the swamp. I mean, the area is remote and full of dense wetlands, which make the idea of a hidden creature possible for some people. Now, another theory is that these sightings were connected to government experiments. I mean, South Carolina has military facilities not too far away, and the idea is that the Lizard Man could have been the result of genetic testing or a secret project gone wrong. Now, there's also the theory that the whole story was exaggerated, fueled by media hype and locals hoping to boost attention for their small town. Now, because there were multiple eyewitness reports and physical damage that was never fully explained, the Lizard Man remains one of the strangest cryptid conspiracies in the United States. I mean, because how do you explain that damage to the cars like that in the area that the thing was spotted, The Ningen. The Ningen conspiracy comes from reports by Japanese fishermen and research crews in the early 2000s. Now, while sailing near Antarctica, they claim to have seen massive human-shaped creatures moving through the icy waters. The beings were described as pale white, with arms, legs, and even facial features like eyes and a mouth. Now, some said that they were over 60 feet long, gliding silently beneath the surface before disappearing into the depths. Photos and blurry videos began to circulate online, which gave the creature its name, Ningen, meaning human in Japanese. Now, one theory is that the Ningen is an undiscovered marine species, something adapted to the extreme cold that looks disturbingly human. People point to how little we know about the deep ocean, especially in Antarctica, as proof that, that's kind of a possible theory. Which, speaking of Antarctica, I actually have a theory video about Antarctica coming out probably after this video. So yeah, there's a little teaser for you guys. Anyways, another theory is that the Ningen is tied to government secrecy. Some say that Japanese and other governments are aware of these creatures but cover up the evidence, treating the Ningen as classified because of what studying them might reveal. There's also the idea that these sightings are linked to misidentified animals like whales or giant rays, with fear and low visibility turning them into something more. Now, again, there's no solid proof of any of this, and the Ningen just kind of sits in an eerie space between, is it an urban legend or is it a possible cryptid? I mean, that would be pretty scary. A fucking 60-foot human that can swim? What? The Olympics, though, would probably be crazy if that was true, though. If we had 60 feet tall people who could fucking swim like Michael Phelps, dude, our Olympic team would be nasty. Or I guess that's in Antarctica. Whose Olympic team would they be on if they're from Antarctica? That's a good question. Someone should Google that and let me know. The Pukwudgie. Pukwudgies come from the Native American folklore, especially from the Wampanoag people of the Northeast. Now, they are described as small, human-like creatures, usually 2 to 3 feet tall, with gray skin, large noses, and sharp features. Now, at first, stories said that they were tricksters who played harmless pranks, but over time, the legends turned darker. Pukwudgies became known for luring people into the woods, causing them to get lost, or even pushing them off cliffs. Some stories say that they can use magic, control fire, or turn invisible. Now, one theory is that the sightings of strange small figures in wooden areas are actually Pukwudgies surviving from ancient times in places like Massachusetts' Freetown State Forest. Now, people claim to see glowing lights at night or feel like they're being watched, and they connect that to the legends. Another theory is that the government knows more about these beings than they admit. Some argued that areas tied to Pukwudgie encounters overlap with places linked to paranormal activity and disappearances, raising suspicion that there's something being covered up. Now, because modern witnesses still report encounters, the Pukwudgie conspiracy theory continues to blur the line between myth, cryptid, and something darker that's just hiding in the woods. The Mongolian deathworm. The Mongolian deathworm is one of the most feared cryptids in Central Asia. Legends from the Gobi Desert describe it as a large worm-like creature anywhere from 2 to 5 feet long, with a blood-red body and no visible head or eyes. Locals say it hides underneath the sand and only emerges during the hottest months. The stories claim it can spit acid that kills on contact or release deadly electroshocks that can take people down and animals instantly. Now, one theory is that the death worm is an undiscovered species perfectly adapted to the desert, staying hidden underground most of the year. Now, eyewitness accounts describe it with enough consistency that argue that it has to be based on something real. Another theory is that the creature isn't natural at all, but connected to military testing in the region. Some people point to the way the worm is said to kill with electricity or chemicals, suggesting it could be a mutated life form from weapon experiments. And there's also the idea that the legends are exaggerated sightings of snakes or desert animals, but the deadly powers don't match up. Skinwalkers. Skinwalkers come from Navajo tradition, and they are often described as witches who use dark rituals to gain the power to transform into animals. The legend says that they can take the form of wolves, coyotes, owls, or even people they know, using disguises to stalk or harm others. The idea isn't just about shape-shifting, but also about stealing control over others, moving unnaturally fast, and creating fear wherever they go. Now, the conspiracy is about whether skinwalkers are purely legend or if something real is behind the stories. Now, one theory is that these skinwalkers are tied to ancient rituals and curses, with some tribes saying that they were once medicine men who turned to evil practices for power. Another theory is that skinwalker sightings are connected to UFO activity and government experiments, especially around places like Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. People there have reported not just strange animals, but also glowing lights, craft-like objects, and mutilated cattle. The overlap has led to the theory that skinwalkers are linked to something non-human, maybe even interdimensional. Others argue that skinwalkers are a way to explain violent crimes, disappearances, and unexplained events in isolated areas. So, skinwalkers are either witches who can transform and terrorize, or they're connected to something darker like aliens or secret experiments. The stories persist because people keep reporting encounters that match the legend. Mothman of Point Pleasant. In the mid-1960s, Point Pleasant, West Virginia became the center of one of the most famous cryptid stories in America. Residents began reporting sightings of a large winged creature with glowing red eyes. It became known as the Mothman, and over a span of a year, dozens of witnesses claimed to have seen it in the skies, on roads, and near an old munitions plant on the edge of town. The sightings created panic and fueled rumors that something larger was happening. Now, one theory about the Mothman is that it was a supernatural being, almost like a warning of disaster. This comes from the fact that sightings peaked just before the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967, which killed 47 people. Many argue that the Mothman was an omen, appearing to foreshadow catastrophe. Another theory is that it wasn't paranormal at all, but connected to secret government projects. The abandoned TNT plant near the sightings was rumored to be a place for experiments, so some think that the Mothman was the result of radiation or genetic testing. Now, there's also the idea that it was an alien, especially since UFO reports in the area spiked at the same time. So the Mothman is either seen as a supernatural warning, a government experiment gone wrong, or even an alien presence. The legend stuck because of the timing of the bridge collapse and the sheer number of witnesses who swore that they saw the Mothman. Loveland Frogman in Ohio. The Loveland Frogman is one of Ohio's strangest urban legends. Now, the first reports go back to the 1950s when people in Loveland claimed to have seen a 4-foot-tall, frog-like creature walking upright near the Little Miami River. Now, the story got serious in 1972 when 2 separate police officers reported seeing the creature on the side of the road late at night. One of them even said it stood up on 2 legs and leapt over a guardrail into the water. From there, the legend exploded and the creature became known as the Loveland Frogman. Now, one theory is that the Frogman is a cryptid because some undiscovered amphibian species have managed to survive hidden in the rivers and wetlands of Ohio. Now, another theory is that these sightings were tied to escaped lab experiments. Now, Ohio has universities and research facilities nearby, so people think it's possible that some kind of hybrid creature got out. There's also the idea that the story was exaggerated over time, starting from a large iguana or animal mistaken in the dark and growing into a cryptid legend with each retelling. So the Loveland Frogman is either a real creature hiding in the rivers, it's an experiment gone wrong, or it's just a case of mistaken identity that basically just snowballed into one of Ohio's creepiest conspiracies. Alrighty, y'all, and last but not least, let's go over 10 creepy internet theories. Polybius. Polybius is one of the most famous video game conspiracies out there. Now, the story says that in the early 1980s, an arcade game appeared in Portland, Oregon, unlike anything people had ever seen before. The cabinet was black, the graphics were hypnotic, and players reported strange side effects after playing. People said it caused headaches, nightmares, memory loss, and even seizures. The strangest part of the story is that men in black suits were seen collecting data from the machines, leading many to believe that it was some sort of government experiment. Now, one theory is that the game was part of a mind control experiment. Now, as we all know, the Cold War era was full of government testing on psychological manipulation, so some argue that Polybius, or however you say it, was designed to measure how games could affect behavior. Another theory is that it was linked to early MK Ultra programs, testing subliminal messaging on unsuspecting kids in arcades. There's also the idea that the whole story was an urban legend created by gamers, fueled by scattered memories of real arcade games with weird effects. Now, the fact that no original cabinet has ever been found only deepens the mystery. So Polybius is remembered as either a secret mind control project, a lost experimental game, or one of the biggest urban legends in video game history. Sad Satan Deep Web Game. Sad Satan is one of the most disturbing gaming conspiracies connected to the deep web. The story surfaced in 2015 when a YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner claimed to have found a strange game while browsing hidden sites online. Now, the gameplay was unsettling, with dark hallways, distorted music, and creepy images flashing on screen. What made it more disturbing were reports that some versions of the game contained graphic images, coded messages, and even references to real-life child abuse and cult activity. Now, the conspiracy is about what Sad Satan actually was. Now, one theory says that it was designed as a recruitment tool by a cult or a secret group hidden on the deep web to target people. The disturbing imagery and messages would fit the idea of it being used for psychological manipulation. Another theory is that the game was created as a government experiment to test how people reacted to disturbing content, almost like a modern-day MK Ultra experiment. But there's also the theory that the game was simply just a hoax created to stir fear and, gain attention, especially since no verified original file was ever been recovered. Lake City Quiet Pills. The Lake City Quiet Pills conspiracy began in 2009 after the death of a Reddit user who went by the name Religion of Peace. He was an older man who often bragged online about being a military veteran and hinted at having worked as a mercenary. After his death, people started digging into his account and noticed strange messages hidden in the HTML of a website he was connected to. The site originally looked like a basic hosting page for adult images, but the hidden text appeared to be coded job postings for armed security and contract killings. Now, the theories about Lake City Quiet Pills focus on whether this was a front for a real network of mercenaries. Now, one theory is that the website was being used to coordinate assassinations or private military operations. The hidden posts read like assignments, mentioning things like load out, clear up, and specific pay rates, which sounded like instructions for trained operatives. Now, another theory is that it was a part of an intelligence operation, with the website acting as a cutout to quietly recruit or pay people without being traced. There's also the idea that the whole thing was an elaborate hoax designed to lure curious internet users into thinking they undiscovered something big. So the Lake City Quiet Pills conspiracy comes down to whether it exposed a real online assassination network, a covert government tool, or just one of the most convincing internet hoaxes ever created. River Children YouTube channel. The River Children conspiracy comes from a mysterious YouTube channel that surfaced a few years ago. The channel uploaded unsettling videos that often showed children standing near rivers or streams, sometimes silent, sometimes repeating strange phrases. Now, the production quality was low, but the videos had a creepy, almost ritualistic tone. What made it more disturbing was that the children never seemed to smile, and the settings always looked isolated. People quickly began questioning what was the purpose of the channel. Now, one theory is that the river children was being used as a front for trafficking or coded communication. The repetitive phrases and unusual video titles were thought to contain hidden messages for specific viewers. Another theory is that the channel was part of an ARG, or an alternate reality game, but the lack of story progression or explanation makes that less convincing. Some also point out that the locations looked real and remote, which raises the possibility that it wasn't staged at all. Others suggest the channel could have been tied to a cult, since the videos felt ritual-like, with the children appearing almost controlled. So the River Children conspiracy centers on whether the channel was a coded trafficking operation, a hidden cult recruitment tool, or just a weird viral dark hoax on YouTube. Super weird. Candle Cove. Candle Cove is one of the internet's most famous creepy conspiracies. Now, the story started on a forum where people reminisced about a strange children's TV show they claimed to have watched in the 1970s. The show supposedly featured puppets, a creepy skeleton pirate named Horace Horrible, and unsettling storylines. Now, the most disturbing part was that some remembered an episode where the puppets just screamed for like minutes, just literally sat there screaming. Now, as some people shared their memories, it seemed like a lost piece of television history was resurfacing. Now, the conspiracy is about whether Candle Cove ever really existed. Now, of course, one theory is that it was a real low-budget children's show that aired locally and then disappeared. Some argue that kids' TV in the 70s often had odd or unsettling content, so it wouldn't be surprising if something like this aired and then was later forgotten about. Another theory is that the memories are actually false, created by suggestion and shared storytelling online. The details about kids watching static when parents saw nothing fuels the idea that it was never a show at all, but something supernatural or psychological that only children could perceive. So Candle Cove is remembered as either a real forgotten show, a supernatural shared experience, or one of the internet's most convincing collective false memories. Cicada 3301 puzzles. Back in 2012, a strange image was posted on the internet with the name Cicada 3301 attached to it. Now, it looked simple at first, it was just white text on a black background, but it said it was part of a puzzle to find highly intelligent individuals. The puzzles that followed weren't basic riddles. They included cryptography, obscure literature, hidden codes in music, and even physical posters placed around the world in cities like Paris and Warsaw. It was on a level so advanced that only a few people online managed to solve them, and even then, what happened after was never really clear. Now, the conspiracy is about who was behind Cicada 3301 and why it even existed in the first place. Now, one theory is that it was a recruitment tool for intelligence agencies like the CIA or NSA, since the puzzles required the same skills used in cybersecurity and espionage. Another theory is that it was tied to a secret society or an underground group, because the puzzles often reference philosophy and mysticism. Some even argue that it was created by a hacker collective to recruit members for something off the grid. So, Cicada 3301 is either government recruitment, a secret society testing minds, or just one of the most mysterious puzzles the internet has ever seen. Ashtar Galactic Command 1977 broadcast. In 1977, a live television broadcast in southern England was suddenly interrupted. Viewers watching the news on southern television heard the picture distort and then a deep voice break through, claiming to be Vrillon from the Ashtar Galactic Command. The voice delivered a 6-minute message warning humanity to put down its weapons and live peacefully or face disaster.
This is the voice of Allah, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you. For many years you have seen us as lights in the stars. We speak to you now to service them as we have done to your brothers and sisters all over this, your planet Earth. We control all of the destiny of your race.
The strange part is that the audio takeover happened without disrupting the video feed, which made it seem even more unsettling. Authorities later called it a broadcast hijacked, but the true source was never found. Now, one theory is that it was a simple prank pulled off by local hackers. Because of how weak broadcast technology was at the time, hijacking a signal was, pretty possible and pretty easy with the right equipment. Another theory is that it wasn't a prank at all, but an actual alien transmission. People argue that no one has ever stepped forward to claim responsibility, and the message lined up with common alien contact themes from UFO reports during that era. There's also speculation that government agencies covered up the real origin, since proving extraterrestrial contact would have been world-changing. So, Ashtar Galactic Command message is seen as either a clever hoax, an alien warning, or a broadcast that the government doesn't want explained. The Elsa Gate scandal. Back in the mid-2010s, parents started noticing strange kids videos on YouTube under the tag of Elsa, Spider-Man, or other popular characters. At first, they looked like harmless cartoons or skits, but once you clicked in, the content often got disturbing. Some videos showed characters in violent or sexual situations. Others included medical themes, injections, or even creepy imagery designed to upset children. Now, these videos were being mass-produced, often with cheap animation or people in costumes, and the algorithm just kept recommending them to kids watching just normal cartoons. Now, the conspiracy formed when people started asking why so many of these disturbing videos existed in the first place. Now, one theory is that it was purely for money. Because children's content gets millions of views, people spammed these low-quality, shocking videos to basically just exploit the YouTube algorithm and their advertising system. Another theory is darker, suggesting that the videos weren't just random spam, but were a part of a coordinated effort to push harmful or subliminal content to children. Some argue that the presence of medical and violent themes was way too intentional to basically be an accident. So Elsagate is remembered as either mass exploitation of YouTube's system for profit or something more sinister aimed at manipulating and harming children online. Smile.jpg. Smile.jpg is one of the most infamous internet horror stories. Now, the story goes that the image first appeared on forums in the late 1990s, often sent as an attachment in chain emails. Now, at first glance, it looked like a distorted photo of a dog, but its mouth was stretched into a human-like grin that was described as unsettling and wrong. The creepy part was that people who saw the picture claimed it caused night terrors, hallucinations, and even drove some to insanity or suicide. Now, the theory around Smile.jpg is that it's not just a cursed image, but a form of digital possession. Some believe that the file itself carries a virus or hidden code that alters the brain when viewed. Others say that the image is tied to something supernatural, like a demon or an evil spirit that spreads through technology. A different theory is that the story was created to warn people about the dangers of downloading unknown files during the early internet era when viruses and malware were everywhere. And for your guys' sake, if you're wondering why I haven't put up a picture of, Smile.jpg, well, I'm doing it for both of our safeties, okay? Just in case one of these theories are right and, we could get cursed just by looking at it. I'm not even going to Google it to put it in this video, and I don't want you looking at it either, so boom, you're welcome. But anyways, Smile.jpg sits between internet urban legend and conspiracy. It's talked about as either a dangerous cursed file used to harm people, or a story made up to scare users away from unsafe corners of the web. Max Headroom Broadcast Hijack. In 1987, Chicago television viewers were hit with one of the strangest broadcast interruptions in history. During a regular news program, the scene suddenly cut to a man wearing a Max Headroom mask. Now, Max Headroom was a popular TV character at the time, known for his glitchy robotic style. But this wasn't the real thing. It was a person in a homemade mask with a distorted voice. The hijacker mocked TV stations, waved objects around, and even made bizarre comments. After about 90 seconds, the signal cut back to normal, and no one has ever been caught for the stunt. Now, the conspiracy theories about this hijack focus on why it happened and who pulled it off. Now, one idea is that it was a group of hackers trying to expose how weak broadcast security really was. I mean, in the 1980s, TV signals could be hijacked with the right equipment, and this event proved it. Another theory is that it wasn't random at all, but it was a message. Some point to the strange phrases and actions in the hijack as hidden signals meant for specific people. There's even speculation that it was linked to underground groups or government testing. So the Max Headroom hijack is seen as either a prank, a demonstration of vulnerability, or a coded broadcast with a deeper purpose. Alrighty, y'all. Those have been 40 of some of the creepiest conspiracy theories on the internet. You know, from cold case theories to paranormal theories to cryptid theories to internet theories. I mean, that was a lot. But as always, I'm getting so close to 600,000 subscribers, so if you guys are not already subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you guys could click that subscribe button. You know, not only does it ensure that you guys, never miss an upload, but it also helps me out a ton. Also, let me know down in the comments below which theories you maybe believed or which ones you found interesting. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And hey, this is my last video in September, so I will see you guys in October. But yeah, I got some really cool videos planned for spooky season. So yeah, stay tuned, guys. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace out.